We're going to look at some of the new features in Windows Server 2008. And there are quite a few changes in terms of Active Directory. One of the key changes to Windows Server is that it's now modular. So unlike Windows Server 2000 or Windows Server 2003, when you installed 2003, you basically installed all or nothing. So in terms of that, it was maybe called a monolithic install. For Windows Server 2008, the actual operating system is very modular. So these modules are segmented into things called roles and features. Now, a role is a major function of the server, and of course Active Directory is a major function. So what are some of the new features in terms of Active Directory? Let's go to the whiteboard and have a look. So, new features for Active Directory in Windows Server 2008. Now, when you first look at this list, you might think, yeah, okay, well, Active Directory's had some of these features for a while, and yes, they have, but they've been available as Microsoft downloads. So what we have, first of all, Active Directory now becomes Active Directory Domain Services. We have ADAM, so you'll remember the Active Directory Application Mode, which was a free download for Windows Server 2003 and 2003 R2. Well, this has now been integrated into the platform as Active Directory Lightweight Directory Services. Certificate Services now becomes Active Directory Certificate Services, and again, there are some significant improvements there which we'll cover during the course of these videos. A new feature which is Active Directory Federation Services. This is an exciting feature because it allows you to work with partners, customers, suppliers who may need a single sign-on solution. In terms of rights management, again, another free download that Microsoft had for Windows Server 2003 was rights management. Again, this has now been integrated into Windows Server 2008 as rights management services. And this allows you to protect your documents or your intellectual property rights of maybe your PowerPoint presentations, emails, and so on. So let's have a look at some of the new functionality in Windows Server 2008 in terms of Active Directory. So what can we see? First of all, some of the new features, and you can see that they are quite substantial. First up, we've got restartable Active Directory. So for the first time, you no longer need to shut down a domain controller. For example, if you need to do a defrag of the ntds.dit database. Also, we have something called granular password policies. So if you're a member of users and groups, you can now have multiple password policies. Again, a very exciting and powerful feature. However, this feature is only available in Windows Server 2008 Forest Functional Mode. Sysvol, as you can see, now replicates with the remote differential compression rather than the old file replication service of previous versions of Windows. So in essence, if items replicate, which of course the sysvol folder contains, for example, all your group policies, your group policy templates, your scripts, so it's very important that these replicate in a timely and efficient manner. The file replication service, of course, is an all or nothing replication mechanism, whereas remote differential compression essentially just replicates the changes. Again, this feature is only available in 2008 Forest Functional Mode. We also, as you've seen, have the option to install Windows Server 2008 either as a full GUI version or as a server core installation. Now, the server core installation, as we know, is just really a command line tool. Well, it's not entirely command line, but for the most part it is. One of the biggest changes, however, is the introduction of something called a read-only domain controller. So the RODC essentially allows us to have a branch office environment, maybe an insecure area where you're concerned that the data is not secure, the equipment might not be secure, and you can essentially have a read-only copy of the database stored on that box. This also allows us for the first time to separate administrator roles. So rather than allowing users at the remote site to have full administrator rights, now you don't need to. Now we can actually make them a read-only domain administrator. Also, we've got enhanced group policy settings. Now, if you're one of these people that have installed Windows Vista just on a standalone machine, to be honest, I don't actually think you're getting the full power of the operating system. So when we talk about, for example, group policy, when we join a Windows Server 2008 and a Windows Vista machines together, then we can see tools like group policy, and look at that, over 3,000 settings compared to the 1,500 settings that were included with Windows Server 2003, for example. Now, in terms of DC Promo, obviously the DC Promo command, the Domain Controller Promotion utility, again in Windows Server 2003, Microsoft introduced the Advanced switch. So, in essence, if you were at a remote site and you didn't have a network connection, you could install an additional domain controller by using the Advanced switch from backup media. Again, a very useful feature. So again, this is now included in the GUI. Also, we've got improved auditing functionality in 2008. So again, you can now, it's much more granular in terms of auditing Active Directory features. And again, some of the reports and the information that you can get out is much more useful. Also, we've got improved recoverability features. So again, including something called a snapshot. So an AD snapshot allows you to take a picture of your Active Directory, you can make changes, and then you can compare the snapshots at later stages. Again, a very, very useful feature for, let's say, for recovering lost items. There are also site improvements as well. So you'll hear later on about when we install DNS. Now, DNS is particularly important in 2008 because if you remember in 2003 and 2000, if you were at a remote site, a branch office, let's say, for example, and you installed Active Directory, it would still install into the default first site, whereas now it will actually install into the site where you're located. And finally, remember that global catalog servers are enabled by default. And why is this? Well, it's basically because we've now got the bandwidth that we didn't have 10 years ago. But that's just a quick look at some of the new features that Active Directory brings for Windows Server 2008.